Did you know that you can create your own original beads out of wire alone? So in this video, I'm going to try and show you how I've come up with some styles that you can also try yourselves. So these are the variety of different types that I've come up with. And you can create lovely pieces. This is like a sampler showing you all the varieties put together, which I think make very attractive necklaces using different types of wire, from copper to brass to silver plate to silver if you want, to gold plate. There's so many types of wire that you can use to create these colourful effects, and also the enamel coloured wires to have more of a pop of colour. So the Coiling Gizmo is an amazing gadget. You put it in between your table, and you can buy these online or from bead shops and bead stores. And if you get one of these, I do recommend this artistic wire one that you can clamp onto your table. Then all the instructions for coiling the wire on this are there. So I really don't have to say any more, and it's a fantastic invention by Leroy Gertz. So do have a look for that. It comes with, see, these brackets, and then you've got these handles, and each one can fit in a different size hole, so you can create larger coils and smaller coils. And you literally just turn the handle like this and create a coil of wire. So the whole thing is about holding the tension and coiling, and you can make long coils by hand very quickly, and they're all very even, which is a lot easier than wrapping it round, a knitting needle, which you can also do. So once you've got your coil, this is how you create the bead. You create a coil, I would say at least 2 to 2.5 inches in length, and you can see it's hollow and it's ready to be created into a bead. So what you do now is get another wire. So this is, I'm using 0.8 of a millimeter 20 gauge, but you can use thinner wires for the actual coil, but the inner part, the wire that I've threaded through the center of the coil, is 0.8. So I'm connecting it to the handle again of the Coiling Gizmo, and I'm holding it there and then turning the handle to create a little bit of a coil without the rest of it coming up at this stage. So you can see it's not very easy to do because I haven't got it clamped to a table, but you just create a little bit of a coil, then push the coil you've just created and hold the base of it, push it right up, and you'll see that you will coil the coil. So it becomes a coil bead. And it's got this lovely sort of caterpillar effect. So that's how you make the beads, and all the instructions will be on the Coiling Gizmo. So if you haven't got one already, I highly recommend it. It's also great for making jump rings and many other things, but we can do that in another tutorial. So you just cut and even off the ends of the wire just to make them sort of flush, and then you can sort of just unfurl it a little bit to open it up in the center, loosen it up, and you're ready now to thread it and use it as a bead. So if you're going to use it on a necklace, you would just get your 0.8 again, thread it through the entire coil, and then you make your links on either side, and then you're ready to link it on, or you could create it into earrings. You can make lovely bracelets, all sorts of things. And as I say, I'm not marketing the Coiling Gizmo. I'm just saying that when I discovered it, I thought, wow, this is such a useful tool to have. if you love working in wire. And to make these beads, it's super easy. And you can see this is a sampler that I made using the Coiling Gizmo to show you lots of different things. And you can thread a bead inside that coil as well. And this is just to show you different things that I have made using the Coiling Gizmo. So maybe if you do request it for another tutorial, you see we can make beaded beads, we can make coil beads, we can use different colors, we can use thinner wires. For another tutorial, we could do a whole tutorial on the Coiling Gizmo and the different things that you can do with it. But for the moment, we're just concentrating on wire beads. This is one that I've made with 0.6 and 0.5 millimeter wire. So use finer wires when you're using coloured. The next thing is the pom-pom bead, and I'm still using the Coiling Gizmo for this. This is 0.4 mil wire. I'm using thin wire for this. You could use thicker wires, but just decided to show it to you with 0.4. And again, we've coiled a coil, but we don't need it to be too even. And I've actually done two. I've prepared one earlier because I want to show you how I layer them. So this is brass wire. I've made a longer piece and I'm going to stretch it out. But I'm not stretching it out completely. I'm keeping that sort of coiled curly whirliness. And then I'm gone to the end and I'm going to roll it around to create a sort of spiral with the end. And then I'm going to wrap that curly whirly wire around that spiral, and that will hook in on itself. Do you see how it sort of hooks into that curliness? I'm holding it, but it sort of holds. And as you're doing it, you don't want to squeeze it too hard, but you want to keep going round because you're trying to create a ball. So it's like wrapping a ball of wool, but with curly wire. And then at the very end, push the cut end into the center and then spend a bit of time, adjusting it so that it's a little bit more compressed and it's not going to, spring out. And you can, like I'm making meatballs, you can roll it around your palms just to get it more compressed and tight and make it feel that it's solid. And there it is. You've got a little round pom-pom ball. Now, you can use another wire. I've got a slightly shorter length that I've stretched out again. And that just adds another tone and another dimension of colour to the piece you've made. Or you can just use this other piece to build up and make it bigger. So if your first pom-pom was a little bit small, you can layer it with another layer of curly whirly wire and just go round and round and round, and again cut off the end and push it into the center so that it doesn't poke out, and then again spend a bit of time sort of pushing it around and adjusting it and making it feel round and compacted and shaped like a ball. So that's how you make pom-pom beads, and they're lovely for earrings. And to thread them, because it's not so compacted, there's still gaps within, you would just take your 0.8 20 gauge wire, find a little space and twist it around, and you'll come through to the other side. And then you can make your circular links on each side. And these have to be reasonably large because otherwise they will push right through. So don't make them too small. Don't make your links too small. And if you just wanted a link on one end and a head pin on the other, you would make a spiral. And if you look in my YouTube tutorials, you will find some pom-pom earring designs that are in, I'm sure it's an earring design I did. So you can sort of look that up and find more tutorials on this. Now we're going for a different bead. So let's move on to ribbon beads. When I say ribbon, I'm just still working with the wire, but I'm flattening the wire this time. So I'm hammering it, but I'm leaving the very, very end unhammered. I've left about 1/2 inch unhammered, and then I've started flattening and hammering. There's no sort of, beautiful way to do this. You just roughly, flatten and move the wire along. It doesn't have to be perfectly done at all. So go along the length, and you'll see it sort of curls up a bit. Don't worry about that. I've got about 18 inches in length here I've cut. So if you wanted a smaller bead, you'd use a bit less. I've used about, I think, 18 to 20 inches to make a sort of reasonably large bead of about, I would say it's about 1 inch or 1 inch and a bit. So I now go to the end that hadn't been hammered, because that makes it easy for me to pick up. And I'm going to start by making a little circle. That's going to be the threading hole of the bead. And then I'm going to continue wrapping this flattened hammered wire around my pliers. And I'm going to go backwards and forwards. Can you see on the tapered end of my round nose pliers to create a sort of tapered bead? Now I'm getting something that's just slightly bigger. I've got to make it a bit bigger. I'm going for my bail makers, but slightly bigger to make the center of the bead a bit wider. So you could use a pencil. You don't have to use bail makers. You could use just something, a rod that's just a bit wider. And then I'm making it a little bit wider there. And then I'm going to go back down to thin it out and taper the bead off. So I put it back onto my round nose pliers to finish off the other end of the bead. So this is quite a long bead, as you can see. And it depends. If you don't want such a long bead, you wouldn't cut so much wire and you wouldn't stretch it out so far. But I do like concentrating on making the middle part of the bead a bit bulkier than the ends. And if you find you've cut too much wire, obviously, you don't have to use it all. I'm just going round and round. You can go over and around. It's got to look very organic. So it doesn't matter that it's not beautifully spiraled. It's just, a lovely organic flat wire bead. And as I say, I call it ribbon wire because it's been flattened, like has this ribbon effect. And now just, if you feel it needs pushing back in, it's gone too, it's been stretched too much, push it in and work on it a little bit until you're happy with the overall shape. And you will be ready then to thread it just like a normal bead. So 0.8 mil, 20 gauge through the center, and then you create the links on either side. So you could add a little bead before you make that link. You can always sort of put a little stopper bead on each side, especially if you make the ends of your beads too big. And there you have it. I've got a little bit too much, so I'm just trimming that, and you can see how that would work as a long bead. So these are obviously made out of copper wire, but you could also use your Coiling Gizmo and you can make much shorter beads because it's easier to handle by wrapping the hammered wire around your Coiling Gizmo handle and then finishing off and threading. So if you have a Coiling Gizmo, by all means use that. It's a quicker way to make your ribbon beads as well. So the next bead I'm going to show you is a barrel bead, and I'm using my bail maker pliers, and I'm going about 1 inch from the end and wrapping it around. This is the 6mm mandrel of the bail making pliers. It doesn't have to be this size, it can be any size you want. And again, if you don't have bail making pliers, you can wrap around a knitting needle, any cylindrical piece that you have, a piece of like an old nail or something, a thin pencil. It's just something cylindrical. And then you can make this as long as you want. So the barrel bead just means it's a coiled bead that's been wrapped around. So you can see I'm making it a little bit longer now. Probably want to go for about 1 inch. And when I've decided, on the length of my bead, I cut it off again, leaving another extended tail on the opposite side. So that's the 2 tails on each side of the bead. And then with each tail, I create a small little circular link at one end. Make it as small as you can. And then grip that. Actually, I might just trim my end just to make it a bit neater and smaller. There we go. You can make it rounder as well by just snipping it off. And then grip it and spiral the wire right up and over that space in the coil. And that creates the lid or the stopper or the end of your bead. It closes it off. So you do the exact thing to the opposite side with that extended length. Make a little tiny circle, spiral it towards the gap of the coil until it sits right on top and covers it. And so now you have a closed little barrel bead which has a threading hole, and I'm using 0.8 for all these beads, and I'm going to make a link with a 0.8 on each side. So you can see how you would thread these, and you can make these as spacer beads. You can make them as short or as long as you wish, and any coloured wires. So you can use, your enamel coated coloured wires of every rainbow colour to make these barrel beads. And that's all it is. There is another type which I'm going to show you too, which I call the barrel hat bead. So you create the same barrel bead, but you also now create 2 extra spirals. So as you know, with spirals, you just make a little circle, wrap the wire around the circle, and these spirals are going to be larger diameters than the actual barrel bead, because they're going to sit on each side of the barrel and sit proud. So you'll see how this works. So I'm making a spiral. See, it's bigger than the diameter of my barrel bead. I'm cutting it off right up, and I'm just trimming the end right up to the spiral. And now I'm going to make a second one. Same thing. Spiral it around, and I'm going to make this the same size as the first one, or as near to. So just take your time coiling the wire, sorry. I'm getting confused with the coils and the beads and the wire now, because the spirals do tend to make your eyes go a bit dizzy, don't they? So same size, snip it off the end of the coil that I'm working from, and then neaten up the very end, the cut end. So I've got 2 spirals, and then when I come to thread the bead, it's got 3 parts. You first of all want to pick up a spiral, then you've got the barrel bead, and then the second spiral. And actually, where it is now, I sometimes make little hats for you can make a hat with just the spiral and the barrel bead to put on your little beaded sort of dancing men. I think I've got a project on that, and I do a Halloween skeleton with a little hat on as well. They're made like this with a barrel bead and a spiral, so it comes in useful for other projects too. So create the links on each side and make sure they run in the same direction, and that is your finished barrel hat bead. And it's quite effective on necklaces. And when I was saying I create hats like this, do you see I create just the barrel bead with 1 spiral on the dancing skeletons. So the next is a scribble bead, and it is what it says on the tin. It's basically scribbled wire. So I first of all I'm going to create the inner part of the bead, and this is a very thin coil. Of course, you can use your Coiling Gizmo, but I'm going to show you how I make this totally with my pliers. So I make a coil, a thin coil. I want it to be narrow. This is 0.8 again. There's my little coil. That's my inner part of my bead. Then I get the same wire again, or you could get another color if you wanted to do a contrast. And I thread the coil, make a link which secures it in place. So I've got my links ready. So I've threaded this coil. So there we go. So there's just a very simple narrow coil bead. But I'm going to create this into a scribble bead by getting more wire. So this is about 18 inches or so. I'm threading it through one of the gaps of this, and I'm just wrapping it around in a very haphazard way. And that's why I call it scribbling. Or you could call it a spaghetti bead. It's just sort of randomly wrapping. You don't want it too loose, obviously, because otherwise you'll have big gaps. And just wrap as much as you want. You want to concentrate on getting more in the center because you want the center to be possibly a bit more bulky than the 2 sides. And then finish off the other end. So you finish off one end and then you finish off the other. And then push down the ends of the wire with your pliers to make sure they are not jutting out or going to scratch when you wear it. So this is a very freestyle, organic looking bead. If you do this in sterling silver, you can patinate it. But you could also use your Coiling Gizmo, and with your Coiling Gizmo you could scribble the wire right on to the handle. You don't have to make this inner coil bead to wrap around. So if you have a Coiling Gizmo, just get your wire and go round and round and round, concentrating more on the center, wrapping more wire around the center, so you've got that sort of fatter part around the center, and it's much quicker to make, obviously, with your Coiling Gizmo. So the next thing I'm going to show you is caged beads. There are various caged beads that I make, and I have shown you how I do a cage for a bead. There is already a tutorial on that. So this is exactly the same thing, but I'm not going to use a bead. I'm just going to create the cage, and it's going to be like a skeleton cage. So I've cut about 8 inches of wire. I make a circle at one end with my round nose pliers, a small little circle, and then I'm going to start spiraling and creating a tight spiral with that end. So we've done this many times with different projects, and then when that has got to a certain size, go to the other end where I've also got another little circular link, which is going in the opposite. I'm spiraling this in the opposite direction. And I want these two spirals to come together and sit next to each other, and I want them to be roughly the same size diameter. So I work on each to bring them together. So it looks a little bit like a swirly S shape. And now I'm going to push out those center links, you know, those, not links, but the center circles that I first made. I'm just going to stretch the rest of the coils, create a space, and pull out the spiral and stretch it out a little bit. And then I do that again on the other one, on the other spiral, on the opposite side. Just tease it out. It takes a little bit of time. You have to sort of wiggle it around. And once you've done that on each side, you're going to fold them together so that the widest parts come together, and that creates the whole bead, the cage. So you really want to just spend a bit of time checking that the spaces between the coils are looking a little bit more even. So that does, you know, you need to sort of work it a little bit. And once you're happy with that, you're ready to thread it. So you do exactly what you do to any other bead. Get your 0.8 again, feed it right the way through, make a link on each side, and obviously that link has to be bigger than the end hole of your cage so it doesn't slip through. But if you don't make it big, you can always just use a little stopper bead. But I'm trying not to use any beads. I'm going to make all my beads out of wire for this particular tutorial. So that is a cage bead. There is also another style which is a cone cage. So same thing, you do start with the tight spiral, and the width of that spiral that you're creating will be the width, the widest part of the cone. So you see I've worked from a spool to make that. And then I've cut it off, leaving an extended length of about 3.5 inches or so. And I'm spiraling that, but whatever you leave, you want to create an open spiral that matches the same size as the tight one. So you can make that as open as you like, and as you bring it to sit on top of the tight spiral, it's got to sit with the two holes opposite each other and being the same shape, and then you pull out and stretch and create the gaps of the cage of the tight spiral to create the cone shape, the tapered cone, and the other end is like a flat lid. So you've got this sort of, yeah, cone cage, that's all I can call it. And it's got this sort of elegance about it. It's very good for a drop. If you wanted to make earrings like that, it's got that sort of whirling tornado look to it. So spend a bit of time again adjusting the spaces between the coils to get it as even as you can, but these are the two types. Now the small drop cage, I'm going to show you this because this is quite useful at the end of a necklace or on the tip of earrings. And this one is, I'm using 6 inches of this copper wire, 0.8, finding the center, and I'm creating a central link that by wrapping it around my pliers, you see it's gone one direction and the other. So I've just crossed over the wires, and then I'm going to make a spiral on each side of that link. So I'm just making a little link going in one direction and then a link in the other direction. And these are going to be spiraled in towards that central link that I made. And this means that because you've got that central link there, you can suspend it from that rather than thread it through with another wire. But I thought it was just a nice one to show you. I often do it as a drop. And of course, all these cages can hold beads, but we're not talking about beads now. We're talking about wire. So can you see there's a link in the center and spirals on each side of that. So again, you want to push out and extend those coils to create that sort of 3D effect. So you sort of wiggle them out, create those spaces. Do that with both of these spirals. Tease them out, create the gaps. And as this is so small, it's obviously a little bit harder, it's a bit more fiddly. And once you've got them pulled out, you hold it in the center and push those two together to create that little sort of drop cage. But it's smaller than the others. You can make it really quite small. And it's great just to hang off earrings and bangles and necklaces and things. So this is the wiggle bead. So I'm using my bail making pliers, but you can use a pencil or any sort of rod. You can see I've left a bit of wire out, it's just coiling a little bit, but I've got this extension and the wiggle then, so I've decided to, it's like making a barrel, isn't it? And then I'm going to create the wiggle now with the wire. I haven't cut the wire off the spool. I'm working 0.8 off the spool, and you've got to keep this as narrow as that top. You don't want to make this too wide. So you're making a backward and forth wiggle with the very, very tips of your round nose pliers, and then you're going to pick up the wire again and continue creating a coil, a tight coil, which is going to make the opposite side of the wiggle bead. So it's like a barrel bead with a wiggle in the middle. And I'm just trying to make it roughly the same amount of coils as the top one. Cut it off the spool at this point. And now I need to reposition, because it's very hard to make it at that angle, reposition those two barrel coils so that they sit in line with each other. So with the extended wire, you're going to, if you remember the barrel bead, we're going to make the tops by creating spirals that fill up those big gaps in the barrel tops. So it's a little circle, spiral, in towards the top of the open barrel coil and then make sure it covers and sits and closes up the top. And the other side is exactly the same. Little tiny circle, bring the wire in and make sure that it sits and neatly plugs the hole at the top. And that's your wiggle bead, which is always going to be a longer bead. So it really works for longer chains, and you can push all those wiggles together if you want to make it a little bit more condensed. And then to thread it, you would just go through and the wire comes through the back of the wiggle, and then you make your links on each side. So this really only works for longer beads, for longer chains, and or earrings. And there we go. It's quite a decorative looking bead. Make sure the links are running in the same direction. And there you have it, a wiggle bead. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. There's a lot of different styles, but have fun making your own. Thanks for watching.